Hello and welcome to this week's live weekly warm-up. This one is going to be a kind of an interesting one. I feel like I'm starting to get into a bit of the more obscure sort of warm-up exercises. We've gone through a lot. I think I've actually been doing this live weekly warm-up for almost a year now. I think I started it around the end of August in 2019. So we're at the end of June in 2020 now. So we're coming up on a year of like every week live weekly warm-ups. So we're starting to get into some more maybe advanced, more obscure ones. But this one's actually really neat and kind of fun and something that I didn't think about doing until a little bit more recently. And it's not something that I've ever really seen in a book, so I think it'll be fun. So what we're doing is scale patterns, just like sort of the normal scale patterns that you're all very familiar with, thinking about like the ascending scale pattern that's in the Albert book, or the scales and thirds that are extremely popular, or even like the triplet stepwise motion is what I call it, which is also from the Albert book. So this is going to be that same exact kind of scale patterns, but now instead of using a major scale or a minor scale, we are going to be using a chromatic scale. So as you can imagine, this really changes a lot of things and will be really helpful for you to really get super comfortable with your chromatic scale. So the one that I want to demonstrate this on is the ascending scale pattern. I think that one works the best. I'll also sort of just mention how to do it on the other patterns as well. So for the ascending scale pattern, that's the one where in a major key it sounds like this. Sometimes these are also called like returning scales or something like that, where you play 4 notes up and then you go to the second note you played and play 4 notes up, and then the third note of the scale and play 4 notes up, and sort of work your way up gradually like that. So when we do this with a chromatic scale, it's exactly the same thing. We're going to play a 4-note chunk and then go to the second note that we played. So instead of being a 4-note diatonic sequence that's going up a step at a time, it's a 4-note chromatic sequence that goes up a half step every single time. This one, again, the range that you do it is all dependent on your skill level. This could be beneficial just doing 2 chunks at a time. You can get quite a lot of benefit from just repeating that and working on the flexibilities of your fingers and lining up all those pinky keys and those kinds of things. You could also do it all full range up to high G. You could even do it up to the high super altissimo C. That would be a lot of work. I personally will say that I've never done that, but if you're feeling really ambitious and you really want to get comfortable with those fingerings and those high, very high altissimo notes, then go for it and give it a try. For now, I'll demonstrate it about 2 octaves, and I'll go up and down. And remember that this is definitely more of a technique exercise, so we're going to slur and still, of course, get the best sound that we can, but it's all about really, really good finger technique, finger motion, and trying to get all of these notes to come out smoothly and steadily. So let's give it a try and see how it goes. you can see that that's a little bit of a tricky exercise. It sounds really kind of cool with this like constantly ascending and then descending chromatic pattern. It's really quite fun to play and is really good for that finger coordination. The point of this exercise is, number one, it really works out your brain because you have to think about these different chromatic notes and get comfortable with those chromatic patterns. And number two, it's so good for your fingers. I always love the chromatic scale in general because it really forces you to know all of the notes, get comfortable with your fingers going on all of those different keys and different sliver keys, side keys, gets all of those things worked in. And then also it's going to make you do that smoothly and navigate through all of them. So it's a really, really great exercise for getting comfortable with the chromatic scale, which then gets you comfortable with playing all of the notes of the instrument. Especially if you do this even further throughout the range and go up higher, then you'll really be getting comfortable with all of the notes. And again, sort of customize this to your own skill and ability. If you can just do 1 octave, that's fine. If you can just do 2 beats, that's fine. As long as you're going for that quality where you're thinking really about getting every single finger nice and relaxed, nice and steady, in the right spot at the right time, then you're going to be getting benefit from this exercise and any other technique exercises you do. The one other things that I wanted to sort of go over on this one with the chromatic scale patterns is we can actually do other scale patterns as well. So if you think of the Albert scale patterns or the Barramon scale patterns, they're very similar. There's the Stepwise Motion one that I call it, which in a major key goes like this. In a chromatic key, we could get something like this. So you see how it's exactly the same pattern, but we're just changing the intervals to make it all half steps rather than the major scale or minor scale pattern. You can also do the scale in thirds, which in a major key is. If you do that chromatically, you actually have 2 options. You can stick with a third and go chromatically, either minor thirds or major thirds. Minor thirds would sound like this. Or major thirds. That starts to sound really weird. And with these chromatic patterns, they don't fit in the ear quite as well as the major and minor scales do. The other option for doing the chromatic scale in thirds is, instead of doing actual thirds, you can do the same pattern where you play the first note, skip the second note, go to the third note, then back to the second, fourth, third, fifth, fourth, and so on. But chromatically, that ends up being up a whole step, down a half step, up a whole step, down a half step. That would sound like this. Again, it has a little bit of a creepy feel to it. So all of these different patterns you can do in the chromatic scale, and maybe even I'll do a demonstration of doing these in some other obscure scales, maybe the whole tone scale or the octatonic, or maybe even a blues scale with these patterns if you're a jazz player. So there's all kinds of options for these different patterns, and applying the same patterns that we're very used to doing and very comfortable with to these more obscure scales, which adds that extra layer of challenge and that extra layer of finger mastery and technique mastery when it comes to playing the instrument. So I hope this one has been helpful. I see Colleen here. Thanks so much for always being here and watching these, and I'm glad that you're enjoying them. And anybody else who may be watching or watches a replay of this, be sure to leave comments with any questions that you have. I would also love comments with any other warm-up exercises that you like to do. Like I said, I feel like I'm starting to get a little bit more into the obscure ones, which is totally fine. I'll go with warm-up exercises forever. But I think maybe some that you like to do, and maybe if it's one where maybe a teacher told you to do it a long time ago, but you're not really sure what the point of it is or like the real reason behind doing it. comment with that, and I will definitely sort of explore it and can maybe explain it to you in a way that helps you sort of understand the real reasoning behind it and the purpose behind it. So thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next week in the next live weekly warm-up.